Hey everybody, Kyle here. Just wanted to start this video off by saying thank you for clicking. This is the recording of the talk that Sam and I gave at Anime Chicago's virtual symposium. We talked a little bit about Gatchaman Crowds, about social media, superheroes, and society. But I do want to just step in here very quickly. There were a few weird cuts in the video recording, so I've gone ahead and edited a few key points. It's not much is lost here, but just letting you know if you see any strange, dissolves or anything, or strange cuts in what we're saying, it's simply because the recording didn't turn out so great. So just want to apologize for that in advance. So enjoy the video.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi there. So just to keep things brief, I am Sam.
I'm Kyle.
And today we want to talk to you about superheroes and social media. What's better than one hero? A whole team of them. Hopefully color-coded with a bunch of different personalities that can bounce off of each other. Your Power Rangers, Avengers, Crystal Gems. Teen Titans was canceled a decade ago, but we still love seeing modern fan art of our faves on Twitter. Go to any of the myriad cosplay groups on Facebook, and it won't be long until you run into a Sailor Moon or any of the other Sailor Scouts. When it comes to anime, though, there was one team that kicked it all off. Science Ninja Team Gatchaman. It is a bit of a silly name, and it sure is a mouthful, but this 70s anime was truly foundational to Japanese media. It featured a group of bird-themed, spacefaring heroes that used cutting-edge science and technology, as well as the power of friendship, to take on dastardly villains. Gatchaman's run would eventually end, but in its wake, it would inspire cultural icons like the aforementioned Power Rangers, spiritual successors of sorts. Many other franchises would have their heroes pay homage to the bird band as well. For example, Persona dancing games let their heroes dress up in Featherman outfits, and in Pokemon X and Y, Pikachu can wear a Gatchaman-inspired costume. The Gatchaman, in essence, are the heroes that inspired heroes. But none of these things are real. No matter how many Marvel movies or Hero Aka episodes we watch, reality dictates that no superhero will ever descend, cape fluttering in the wind, to deliver us from harm. Despite that, though, we still believe in heroes. That sincere love still exists. Because we don't need paragons or heat vision. All we need is the occasional reminder of humanity's capacity for kindness and goodwill. And social media sites can be weirdly good at delivering this. They show us heartwarming stories from around the web on a daily basis. Heroism does exist, and its source isn't Krypton or magical animal sidekicks. It comes from humans looking at each other, deciding to care, and then going forth and doing what they can to help, even if it's just a little bit. Strangely, there is an anime that's all about this, right down to the social media part. In 2013, Gatchaman Crowds began airing. It sold itself as a modern take on the age-old hero team formula, but then quickly pronounced the age of superheroes over and instead raced to embrace the internet and all the possibilities it could bring. By the end of its short 12-episode run, it leaves the audience with one core idea. When the internet brings swaths of normal people together, it can help them accomplish more than any singular hero ever could.
There's a bit of a weird tension that underlies all this, though. Nakamura and the team made a conscious decision to take one of the most beloved IPs in all of Japan and sell it as a modern incarnation of the classic superhero team. But the show spends its first episode and a half lulling the audience into thinking they're watching a sci-fi action anime only to pull the rug out from under them, pushing aside fights for philosophy. Is there a point here, or was the studio just profiting off of brand recognition? I would argue that Nakamura and the rest of the creative team were being kind of meta, and this was back in 2013, before being meta was tired and overdone. Gatchaman Crowds is about updating the world in a new age of technology, and it takes the very firm stance that our idea of what makes a hero needs to be updated too. You see, a hero is a society's paragon, the ideal incarnation of its values, a protector of their way of life. And yeah, Science Ninja Team Gatchaman fit this role back in the 70s, but rapid technological advancement and the now ever-present internet have changed our lives in massive ways. The world was always nuanced, but now things are even more complex, and it's hard to believe we can rocket punch all of our problems out of existence. Gone is the time when we thought evil overlords could be beaten to submission. Now, everyday Twitter news feeds keep us updated on the political landscapes of countries, and malicious actors use platforms like Facebook to spread hateful ideologies. Heroes aren't fighting dragons anymore, they're struggling against hydras. A nuanced look at the current day leaves the stereotypical hero flawed. There's no larger-than-life, powerful figure that will save the world. Crowds chose to use the famous Gatchaman brand in order to illustrate this idea that the hero is an inherently flawed concept, an aspiration that is a symbol of parts of culture that refuse to change, grow, and step into the modern world. But that said, it's not a broken concept. Truth, justice, protecting the innocent, these are all still noble things that we should wish to see. The hero is not so faulty that it should be tossed out entirely. Rather, it needs to be updated. And so Crowds lovingly critiques the idea of a secret hero team and the dated culture they represent. After all, placing power and responsibility into the hands of faceless organizations acting behind the scenes hasn't panned out. Crowds asks, what flaws does this sort of hierarchy present? Why should the powerful act in secret? Shouldn't people shaping the world be held accountable? And of course, why is that power only afforded to a select few? To really understand the societal systems Crowds is challenging and why it thinks social media is the solution, we need to first pull back and look at the culture the show was created in.
Gatchaman Crowds, of course, takes place in modern Japan, a country widely known for its heavy emphasis on tradition, respect, and hierarchy. Now, these things exist in almost every country and government, but Japan tends to take them a lot farther than most. Respect is of utmost importance, so much so that Japanese as a language is built around etiquette and deference. You may be acquainted with the concept of keigo, or respectful language. Basically, when you're talking to your boss or another person of high importance in Japanese, you switch to a variation of the language that's more proper. It's a really complex area, but a quick way to illustrate it is with honorifics. You know, like san, kun, chan, the good stuff. Suffixes like these are another important way to show respect. They're informed by the interpersonal relationship you have with someone as well as their professional position. So let's say I have a college professor by the name of Tanaka. I would refer to them as Tanaka-sensei, sensei here denoting knowledge and authority. Meanwhile, san is a neutral honorific for people on the same level as you. It's the standard. But if I were to refer to Professor Tanaka as Tanaka-san, that would be like saying, I don't respect or acknowledge your expertise. I am bringing you down to the same level as me. And yeah, the same level as you doesn't sound so bad, but being humble is a major part of Japanese culture and language as well. So much so that it's often joked that in Japan, you start every conversation by apologizing for being alive. So no, absolutely do not bring people down to your level. It's insulting unless they're your friends. Now, what about those anime favorites? Where's the love for chan and kun? These are highly affectionate and generally childish or pretty intimate, so if I were to call Tanaka Tanaka-kun, it would kind of be like raising my hand in the middle of lecture and saying, "Oh, Mr. Tanaka, how cute that you're playing teacher." So clearly you don't want to do this. Now, if you've taken Japanese before, you know all this, and thank you for bearing with me through the explanation. You also know that this is very, very important stuff, because messing up your respectful speech is tantamount to insulting someone. This means that in order to successfully navigate Japanese society without sounding like a total jerk, you have to constantly be wary of your place in the social hierarchy, as well as how you match up to those around you. We can go back and forth all day about the benefits and drawbacks of a system like this, but one thing is absolutely certain. Gatchaman Crowds takes issue with this societal structure and aims to critique it. Alongside social media, the hierarchical nature of Japanese society is another big topic under the scope.
So this raises the question, what is the model of society that Crowds wants to see, and how does it stack up against the more traditional Japanese viewpoint? In order to explore this, Gatchaman Crowds employs the oldest trick in the book, making their hero a paragon. but not of current society, of their aspirational society. The protagonist of Crowds, Ichinose Hajime, is effectively a walking incarnation of the show's ideals. She is the perfect beacon of good that everyone should strive to be. But here's the kicker. Very few characters in universe view her this way. In fact, many people are exceedingly put off by Hajime when they first meet her. They think she's a weirdo, stupid, or even disrespectful. And this is kind of realistic because Hajime is still living in modern Japan. She's going through life at odds with how society currently works. Hajime is, at first blush, looked down on by almost everyone in this series. But Hajime really couldn't care less. Sugane, her senpai and fellow Gatchaman, thinking collages are stupid isn't going to stop her from having fun with them. Joe, a seasoned Gatchaman refusing to shake her hand, isn't going to make her any less excited to meet the rest of her new teammates. Show villain Berg Katse throwing every insult under the sun at her won't make any of the things they say true. Hajime not only understands that people's disapproval of her doesn't actually affect her ability to go about life, but she also chooses to empathize with the people that wrong her. Venom doesn't come from nowhere. There's always a catalyst. There's more to it than Hajime giving everyone the benefit of the doubt, though. Crowds is a show that is intensely interested in the idea of updating society, changing and improving, advancing it into a new form. Hajime is the emissary from that new world, and she acts in line with the ideal values rather than what fits with current society. To put it very simply, Hajime treats everyone equally. Now, this is another place where Hajime goes against the grain, much to people's disapproval. She never addresses anyone on the team with deference to rank, instead quickly making up cute nicknames, and even refers to the Prime Minister character, Sugiyama, as Sugeyan, to his face. This is a cutesy made-up nickname bearing, like, zero respect. That's really out of line according to traditional values, but Hajime isn't demeaning anyone. She's just treating everyone as her friend. With the major focus on social media in the show, there's a huge case to be made here about how apps like Facebook and Twitter have changed how we interact with politicians in real life. Once they were faraway figures on radio and TV screens, but now we can interact with them with some degree of directness on Twitter. But Hajime can't always be talking to the literal prime minister. She needs a more constant representation of the traditional values that Crowds has a bone to pick with. So they give her a counterpart, a character that can represent traditional society. This is Sugane, Hajime's senpai both in school and as a Gatchaman. He's a responsible kid with a good heart. He takes his duty seriously and wants to use the power granted to him to do good. But he has his flaws. He's absolutely obedient to authority, and he strictly abides by social norms and shuns those who don't without a second thought. Sugane is so obsessed with matching the shape of the perfect paragon that he refuses to even consider breaking the mold. And Crowd shows us how this can make him unknowingly rude and cruel. If someone steps out of line, he assumes the worst in them without even considering why they might be behaving differently. Oh, and of course, he doesn't really see the value in this newfangled technology. So someone like Hajime is a bit of a shock to his system, and the interactions between them are a microcosm of Crowd's critiques on society. From day one as a Gatchaman, Hajime refuses to follow orders given by her superiors. It's not like she's some rambunctious rebel. Rather, when things stop making sense to her, she stops listening to the people in charge. This causes Sugane to doubt Hajime, but time and again, she proves that she not only understands and can handle these situations, but also that her unique perspectives and friendly, communicative approach yield far better results than the previous methods of force and authority. Hajime is all about the benefit of the doubt. She doesn't want to hurt people, so why would others? An alien life form might not understand that it's hurting humans. A speeding car probably didn't mean to almost hit her. They might be rushing to a hospital. A teen not giving up their seat to the elderly on a train might be under the weather. People always do things for a reason, and very, very rarely is that reason pure malice. Hajime is a champion of compassion, and through the connections she cultivates with others, she helps open them up to a new point of view.
Connection is one of Crowd's more blatant themes, though more often than not, it's explored within an online context. An app called Galax is the main vehicle through which digital connection and its influence on the real world are examined. Like any standard social media app, Galax provides users the opportunity to connect and interact in a digital space. But that's only half its utility. Upon download, the app asks users what skills they have, and then, when other users are facing peril, they can alert Galax to their situation, and it will automatically reach out to other local Galaxers who can provide aid. A woman struggling with malicious neighbors is matched up with a lawyer who specializes in civil disputes. A nearby off-duty nurse is called to the scene of an accident almost immediately after it's happened. These small-scale heroics are facilitated through the app's artificial intelligence, simply referred to as X. X understands each individual's strengths via their profile, and then calls on them to play their part when they're needed. Crowds highlights that a system like this can only be made possible through modern technology. Say you know first aid, and just down the street, someone doing yard work accidentally slices their arm open. In our world, you'd have no way of knowing that, and the poor guy would have to seek help and wait for it to arrive while bleeding out. Crowds wants us to imagine a world where an AI in your phone could alert you to that situation and help you help that man, potentially mitigating long-term damage and certainly lessening his suffering in the moment. Yes, we do have specialized forces like paramedics and firefighters, but everyone's capable of helping if there's a means of identifying their skills and alerting them. This all sounds great, but we do have to factor in the bystander effect and the human capacity for selfishness. Both of these are very real things, and they'd stand in the way of a system like this, right? Well, Crowds accounts for it. At its core, Galax is still a social app that entertains its users. It's not emergency features all the way down. In order to galvanize users into heeding X's call in times of trouble, the app makes altruism into a minigame. When you respond to a call for aid, you're awarded in-app points that level up your personal account, as well as communal world update goals. It's simple, it's immaterial, but scores and points are undeniably something humans respond to. The application of video game elements to non-game scenarios is known as gamification, and it's increasingly being used in fields like education to encourage positive behaviors. Here's an example. Back in high school, did your teacher ever use Kahoot to give practice quizzes? Or did you ever play a Jeopardy-style game via PowerPoint the day before a test? These are both prime examples of gamification. Yeah, at the end of the day, you're still going to be matching biology terms and definitions, but now you want your team to win so badly, right? In 2017, a study into gamification found that the implementation of leaderboards or the awarding of achievements and badges can significantly increase human motivation towards menial or undesirable tasks. Additionally, assigning players to a team can positively impact interpersonal relationships and develop senses of camaraderie that persist even after the game is over. So the systems used by Galax to encourage kindness actually do have real-world basis. It's not something that's ever been tried before, but it feels very plausible. This is part of what makes the show's exploration of people and the internet so fascinating. It has a strong grasp of how humans behave, and it combines this with a solid understanding of the internet and how it works. Crowds is able to have a nuanced conversation with its audience because modern technology is not a foreign concept to the writers. They can see where technological advancement is going and want to speculate on the positive ways we can use it. So the future's bright, right? People will connect with one another to solve problems, making the world a much less complicated place. Well, not exactly. As we all know too well, the internet is not always a great place. The show understands that social media is not without its banes. No system like this can ever be truly perfect. There's still some inherent selfishness within humanity. Improving life always sounds appealing, but only when it applies to your life. Otherwise, who cares?
Quelling online instigators and selfish internet lurkers is the #1 goal of Ninomiya Rui, the youthful savant behind Galax. The app is meant more than anything to act as an equalizing force. If every person is connected, regardless of the roles they play in society, then the walls put up to separate us don't matter anymore. Rui takes us to another level, though, through the use of the titular crowds. Despite operating as a solo act for the majority of the show, Rui is actually a Gatchaman, one with a special ability that is wholly unique to them. While using an electronic device like a laptop or a tablet, Rui can manifest their soul to create a sort of digital homunculus. It's strong, it's fast, it has this versatile, elastic body. It's the perfect tool for remote superheroism. But that's not all. This power can also be bestowed upon anyone Rui chooses, allowing entire groups of these creatures to be summoned and controlled at any given time, thus the name Crowds. Since many hands make light work, Rui imparts this ability onto a group of 100 specially selected Galax users who work together to do good. Whenever there's an accident or natural disaster that normal emergency services fall short of remedying, Rui unleashes the Crowds and lets the people be their own heroes. In a world that already has literal superheroes, putting the power in the people's hands is the ultimate equalizing act. Equal as it may be, giving people power isn't always an inherently good thing. Sir John d'Albert Jacton once said, "Power tends to corrupt, and absolute power corrupts absolutely." In the case of Crowds, the power to weaponize one's soul, acting remotely from behind a screen and free of accountability, is nothing short of absolute power. Not only are there individuals within the 100 who have smaller, petty desires they'd like to use the Crowds for, but there are also the emboldened extremists who want to use this power to forcefully enact major political changes. Talk like this is quickly silenced by Rui, with message boards being shut down and power being stripped away from the radicals. In response to this restrictive behavior, we begin to see echo chambers form on the app, X100 members riling each other up and vilifying Rui for building new walls. And while we're never really meant to sympathize with these extremists, they exist to exemplify the flaws in Rui's perfect system. It's certainly an improvement on the traditional social structures currently in place, but there's still hierarchy, there's still harmful power dynamics, there's still inequality. On top of this, there's a problem with the lack of accountability Crowds provides. Radicalization, anonymity, and echo chambers are daily headlines nowadays, but it's quite impressive that the show was able to so clearly see where internet culture was going back in 2013. In a way, Crowds users parallel the Gatchaman. They work in secret and have power enough to shape the world as they see fit. But Rui's supervision is prone to human error, and rather than having an ancient intergalactic code of conduct, the ideals that Crowds users are told to uphold boil down to make the world a better place, which has room for interpretation and can thus be interpreted as make the world a better place for me. It's here that series antagonist Berg Katse enters the equation. This chaotic alien being thrives off the despair of others and is capable of bringing entire civilizations to ruin. While Berg is undeniably powerful, they don't just unleash a barrage of wanton violence on the planet. Rather, they slowly manipulate the people into ending the world themselves. The term may feel a bit dated now, but Berg is clearly a hyper-powered internet troll. They rile people up just for fun, they revel in the misfortune of others, and attempt to catalyze conflict and harm just for the lulz. On top of one of the most powerful tools they have at their disposal is the ability to take another person's face, disguising themselves in an attempt to sow more mayhem. With this in mind, our alien antagonist decides to target the Crowds, exploiting that system's greatest flaw. They steal Rui's face, seize control of the entire social media app, and give the most radical and unfit individuals carte blanche with the Crowds. With the full power of the Crowds in their hands and the enthusiastic encouragement of their leader, these extremists can finally see their revolution through to its natural conclusion: a disorganized series of terrorist attacks. Government buildings are razed to the ground, and Crowds users begin a headhunt for the Prime Minister. Again, it's absolutely wild that Gatchaman Crowds animated this scenario back in 2013, when just earlier this year we saw an insurrection at the United States Capitol, one that was in large part propelled by online radicalization. The scenarios explored in Crowds are dramatic fantasy, but they share so much DNA with the real world. This anime is, at times, a cautionary tale. Speaking of cautionary tales, Gatchaman Crowds takes the time to explore the minutiae of radicalization through the lens of Umeda Koichi, the self-proclaimed leader of the show's extremists. As a member of the 100, he had a grand vision for the country. big ideas that he'd be able to make reality if he had complete freedom to use the crowds as he saw fit. But behind the screen, he's an ordinary family man. He cares about his wife and daughter, he's passionate about politics, and he's devoted to the cause of updating the world. So devoted, in fact, that he's taken enough time off work to lose his job. So when he has the power to use crowds stripped away, his entire world seems to crumble down around him. Not only does he lack the financials to support his family, but he no longer has any means to change this world. In short, everything is terrible, and none of it is his fault. He's the victim. When Umeda finally gets the opportunity to make his vision a reality, he doesn't hesitate to lead the charge, having the crowds target major government buildings in the area. It doesn't matter who gets hurt in these attacks because, at the end of the day, the government is the enemy here. Yet, when the movement dilutes and the wanton, selfish violence spreads to his neighborhood, Umeda is shocked and appalled. Now that his life and the well-being of his family are at risk, this sort of violence is abhorrent and inherently wrong. It's no longer public figures he only knows through TV and newspapers. Now it's him. Only now is the violence real. This kind of hypocrisy does, in a way, mirror Rui's own hypocritical stance on the crowds in the first place. Rui wants to update the world through connection, through the will and power of the people, yet continues to cut people out of the system. Umeda wants a revolution by force, yet can't stand the idea of his family being harmed by the aimless violence he instigated. With both of these extremes having their own disastrous flaws, how then do we go about updating the world?
To answer that question, we turn back to Golden Child Hajime. When the newest Gatchaman isn't being a social revolutionary or an icon, she spends her time on Galax. It allows her to interact with her friends on a regular basis, make new friends with similar interests, and it lets her get very important information out into the world. For Hajime, Galax is already the perfect app, but it has a lot to do with how she uses it. In her eyes, it's not the new home of communication. It's more a tool to facilitate real-world interaction. First and foremost, it's all about connecting with others. The most emblematic of these connections comes in the form of collage meetups, wherein Hajime and several of the fellow citizens all come together to bond over their mutual love of papercraft. Without Galax, this group never would have met in the first place, but once that initial connection was made, the majority of the group's meetups happen in person, free from any sense of social hierarchy, just as Hajime would want it. Both the city's elite and the common folk alike can enjoy this space together, without fear of prejudice. Similarly, when situations seem dire, Hajime always opts to use Galax to spread information. She even reveals the Gatchaman's truth and identities to the public, and then proceeds to use the app to keep the public updated on the team's current actions. Hajime becomes the Gatchaman's communications manager, running livestream Q&A sessions or announcements when the chaos begins to spread. This helps to ensure the utmost transparency when dealing with important stuff. The Gatchaman have been anonymous for far too long, so by finally putting faces to the names, they can better reach out to the world and connect with people. Transparency and trust in the common man are the missing ingredients in Rui's system. The elements that have been entirely keeping the social media revolution from truly blossoming. This is the fuel behind Hajime's impossibly optimistic outlook on life, and their characteristics that slowly spread to each of the other Gatchaman, bringing out the best in all of them. If this isolated system can be improved with a single person's meddling, then surely it can be done on a micro scale, a true updating of the world. One of the most exciting things about being online is that you can be whoever or whatever you want to be. Your literal physical distance from the situation and the digital walls in place keeping you obscured can allow you to completely reinvent yourself. You can be someone else for a change and not really have to worry about the consequences. This is also one of the most dangerous things about being online. Catfishing, cyberbullying, misinformation campaigns. With very little accountability, these sorts of issues continue to plague us. As soon as people realized they could game the system in this way, use obfuscation to their advantage, they ran with it. The internet, and by extension social media, exist to help keep us connected. Yet, because of how so many people misuse it, we've built up new walls to keep ourselves safe. Within Gatchaman Crowds, we see this obfuscation occur on both small and large scales, both online and in the real world. The biggest offender here is actually Dewey. Despite Galax being such a popular social media app, its creator refuses to ever go public. Dewey mentions that they don't want to be seen as some grand figure, not a leader or a hero, because so long as those roles exist, they don't think people will mature. But think back to the example from earlier, the man who injured himself doing lawn work. If you knew that someone else could handle the situation, paramedics, some other bystander, or a hero, would you really step in and act? Reliance on a higher power is something inherently human. We rely on someone else to solve our problems from the earliest years of our lives, and some of those old habits tend to die hard. So, Dewey wants to build a world where we don't look to the sky expecting someone to fly down and save us. Instead, we save ourselves. This is all fine and good, but Dewey contradicts this constantly. They create a specialized group of heroes that work in secret to save lives, admittedly a necessary evil considering there is a limit to what people can do on their own, but hypocritical nonetheless. On top of this, Dewey continues to meddle in the affairs of the 100, making it their business to decide when, where, and why the crowds gets to be used. Dewey honestly does believe that humanity can evolve past the hierarchies that currently bog them down, but they don't really trust humans. On top of Dewey's reservations about humanity, they also maintain a great deal of distance from people as a whole. This allows room for misunderstanding to breed. If you only really hear the worst about people, you're liable to lose your trust in them entirely. Inversely, we have the highly connected, trusting, and fully transparent Hajime. She's willing to give anyone and everyone the benefit of the doubt, putting faith in complete strangers in the face of what can appear to be malice. She even manages to empathize with Berg Katse, the cruel and deliberate mastermind behind almost all of Sho's chaos. She still understands the great evil in their actions. Hajime is not stupid, very far from it, in fact. But Hajime is the only person in the show who seems interested in understanding why Berg acts the way they do. She goes out of her way to try and talk to the villain whenever possible because, when you get right down to it, the Gatchaman know next to nothing about this antagonist. Hajime has the maturity necessary to reach out and try solving this problem with civility, extending a hand as opposed to raising a fist. Every individual being unique and having their own set of experiences and skills is crucial to the updated world Dewey envisions. You shouldn't have to change yourself to make the world a better place. Being you is already your superpower. What Gatchaman Crowds wants us to understand is, at the end of the day, it's a good thing people are different, and when peril and selflessness spur masses of those unique people to come together, they're a force that can be greater than any superhero, alien mob, or government. Variety is the spice of life. Meeting people with unfamiliar worldviews helps us to expand our own. We just have to be willing to make those connections in the first place. In order for the world to truly update, people need to be willing to share themselves with others and work towards common goals.
So let's zoom out and settle one final quandary. Does Gatchaman Crowds' exploration of social media carry any weight? It's been nearly a decade since the show aired, and the internet has only grown more and more important since. How do its predictions and morals match with our new everyday? As we've seen, the core philosophy of the show is twofold. First, that when power is decentralized and placed equally in the hands of the people, humanity is capable of self-regulation towards the best outcomes. Second, the internet is a means of facilitating this by increasing our capacity for connection, communication, and transparency. Is there any hard, real-world evidence that allows these ideas to stand up to scrutiny? Well, the cruel, selfish, and sometimes evil part of the internet does exist. There are whole communities dedicated to convincing young, vulnerable people that their lives are inherently doomed and the world is awful. There are people that spend all their time hate mobbing and harassing creators for the slightest mistake or offense. And there are people that abuse online spaces and platforms for selfish gains. But how many people are really like that? Surely enough to do damage, but are malicious actors really the majority? When you look around at all your friends, both material and virtual, how many of them are benevolent? How many have helped you and would help you again if you called on them? What Gatchaman Crowds wants us to believe is that humanity's base state is altruism, that when we come together and see each other as people deserving of dignity and respect, we ultimately desire good for them. We're a social species. Our brains evolved into massive supercomputers, specifically so we could work together, and that primal instinct, that most basic binary code, still exists in the base of our souls. In the midst of a global pandemic, an unprecedented state of emergency, the common man has come together to fund countless GoFundMes to keep those in crisis housed and fed, expecting nothing in return. After years of economic bad news and scavenging for scraps, a bunch of strangers on the internet broke Wall Street by investing en masse in GameStop stocks, resulting in many normal internet lurkers donating their winnings or finally being able to afford life-saving surgeries.
When a hate mob used sock puppet accounts to freeze funding for a trans charity in the UK, a streamer ended up raising millions of dollars by 100%ing the masterpiece that is Donkey Kong 64. Group altruism is in our DNA. It's the driving force behind these stories and so many others. Without the internet, without social media, none of these miracles would have happened. We're connected on a scale so much grander than ever before. Hell, we wouldn't be having this whole event, enjoying our collective passion for anime, if it weren't for the internet. When we come together, we're capable of so much more good than any dissonant sect of bad actors. In the modern age, we can all be heroes.